Good morning and welcome to the daily cyber briefing for Thursday, the 15th of August. I'm Stephen Ridgway. Um, so, if it is the day that you get, well, it is the day, in fact, if you are getting your A level results today, or members of your family or friends or so on has got their A level results this morning, hope you've done as well as you'd expected. Hope if you're planning to go to uni, you've got the grades to get to the uni that you were hoping to get to, and generally wish all the people at that stage in their careers and their education all the best for the future. So, right, where do we begin? Zero-click Windows TCP/IP remote code execution impacting all systems with IPv6. With IPv6 enabled. So, been patched. It was part of this month's Patch Tuesday series of patches. This particular vulnerability is being tracked as CVE 2024 38063. It's actually an integer underflow weakness, which I had to remind myself what those were. But it is effectively when two numbers are subtracted from each other, but the result, excuse me, the result is expected to be positive, but has come out negative. So it's effectively something which is a mathematical outcome which the code was not expecting in that respect. In this case, it can trigger buffer overflows, which we do not know about, which can be used to run arbitrary code on Windows 10, Windows 11, and Windows Server systems. It is apparently relatively straightforward to execute. It's what they're describing here as a low complexity attack, using crafted IPv6 packets sent repeatedly to the device. Now, does this matter? Well, I think yes, it does matter. Firstly, it's a vulnerability. It's possible to remotely execute this, the exploit. Although it isn't being widely used at the moment, expect that now it's known about, people will be crafting proof of concept codes and exploits and you name it, this, that, and the other on it. However, I think more importantly than that, the real reason I'm picking out this one to talk about is because one of the concepts which we all know about in InfoSec and cyber, but rarely do much more than think about it, nod sagely, and move on, is minimizing the threat landscape of the systems that you have control over. So, hands up anyone who actively uses IPv6 in preference to IPv4. If anybody put their hand up, well done, you're properly geeky. But it's still rare. For as long as I've been working in this industry, which is 25 years plus, IPv6 has been on the cusp of replacing IPv4. 25 years later, IPv6 is on the cusp of replacing IPv4. It hasn't actually happened. However, what has happened in the background is that almost anything that connects to a network now has IPv6 enabled by default. We almost invariably just ignore it. We know it's there. We don't really know what to do with it. Very few people that I know are competent and confident to replace IPv4 with IPv6 across anything other than piddly little test networks. Yes, it goes on, and maybe possibly if you're working in telco space, then yes, you are using it. But raises the question: why does your Windows laptop or your Mac laptop or your phone or whatever run IPv6? Interestingly, I think it's an example of one of those just bits of stuff that runs that nobody ever thinks about whether they need it or not, or if they do, it's along the lines of, well, I don't really know whether something's actually using this or not, so I won't mess with it. I'll just leave it alone. But your home router, your phone, your laptop, all the servers that you connect to, most of the websites that you connect to, they're all sitting there running IPv6 in the background. Whether it's actually doing anything is another matter altogether. So, coming back to the focus for why I picked this one out, if you don't need something to be running on your devices, turn it off. So you can disable IPv6. Now, interestingly, Windows, Microsoft have said in perfect internal contradiction with themselves that one of the things you can do is turn off IPv6. However, they also say that the IPv6 network protocol stack is a mandatory part of Windows Vista, Windows Server 2008, and newer versions, and it doesn't recommend turning it off. So it both recommends and doesn't recommend turning it off. I mean, as with all of these things, there's no reason why you can't turn it off. You just got to make sure that you've got some testing in place to understand whether what you've done has impacted any business critical processes that you're running. By now, one would hope that you've got a decent set of regression tests, so that you know that if you make any changes, those changes will be it won't go into production, as it were, without having been confirmed not to impact any business critical processes. So yes, turn it off. I would say though, have a think about not only IPv6 that you may not actually need on all your devices, but have a think about anything else that might be running by default on any of your devices. And if you look at that as going, oh, I have no idea how to do that, well, start out with two things. One is have a look at what processes are running and actually understand what they do. Yeah, there might be quite a lot of them. No, it isn't an unmanageable amount. And yeah, it will probably be the same across a large swathe of your estate anyway. And the other thing is actually have a look at what's going on your network. So have a look to see what devices what ports and protocols devices are actually listening on, and what are they communicating on, and have an actual understanding about what's going on around your network. As a colleague of mine from years ago said when I was young in my career, and he was an experienced guru in all this stuff. He said, Stephen, the answer is in the packets. So, yeah, Kevin, I agree with you on that point. Well, I doubt if you listen to this briefing, but if you do, yeah, kudos. Right, on to other things. So, we are all very aware of threats to what we would consider sort of Western countries, Western governments, Western democracies, blah, blah, blah. The likes of China and Russia and North Korea and Iran, and we are very much cognizant of the fact that those nation states have an interest in either causing disruption or stealing information or whatever it may be from Western organisations. But there is, I think, perhaps a unspoken assumption that it's the rest of them against us. In that sense, this article in Dark Reading I found quite interesting, in that it talks about the fact that we haven't quite got our view on these things right from a global politics perspective. This article talks about a new Chinese threat which is targeted at Russians. So even though we tend to feel like they're all ganging up on us, they're actually quite busily attacking each other in the background as well. So why does this matter? Well, I think it matters from the point of view of firstly, understanding that when nation states go into this sort of game, they've got their agendas. Okay, we see one particular side of that, but that doesn't necessarily mean to say that that is the only reason why particular things are happening. Second one is, and this is a good case in point, state-sponsored groups are more likely to cooperate with each other within a particular geopolitical field than, say, criminal groups are. So we're aware of, in this particular case, which is being dubbed East Wind, because from a Western perspective, China's in the East. Oh, my goodness. So there we go. APT 31 and APT 27 appear to be cooperating, certainly from a tooling perspective, in this stuff. When you think about it, one way or another, they're all controlled by the Chinese government. They may be separate departments, they may be separate units within the People's Liberation Army, whatever it may be. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't think of them as cooperating over stuff. And it looks like they are here. This particular campaign is using well-known components, which would be like considered what we used to call living off the land, but it's kind of like now just living off the cloud. But they're using things like Dropbox to host C2 servers. So yeah, need to keep an eye on what's going on. Also raises the point which we've spoken about a lot in the past. So just as a reminder, rather than a proper rant about this one, but understand what connections are being made to external parts of your environment. And when I say external, I don't mean that from an old-fashioned colo kind of inside-outside. I also mean that from a what are your cloud environments talking to? So yeah, make sure you've got visibility of that stuff. I appreciate it is not always as easy in a cloud environment to understand how what's talking to what. It's not impossible. You just need to get on and do it. So yeah. Takeaways from this: watch out, because groups that you may not think of as working in collaboration with each other might be, and also be aware that not everything is focused uniquely against the West. There are all sorts of things going on for all sorts of other reasons, and understanding the geopolitics of what you're trying to protect is a very important part of understanding how to manage the threats aimed at you. So, CrowdStrike. Fair to say, CrowdStrike. They haven't had since the 19th of July. However, I have to say, I think they've done a pretty decent job of transparency over what happened, and I think they are doing as good a job as can be hoped of from the point of view of dealing with the aftermath of something as catastrophic as the issues from the 19th. It is, they have been very noticeably at places like Black Hat recently. They are not trying to hide or unduly explain away what went wrong. So they've effectively, I think, put their hands up to this. One could argue they could have done more. You can always argue you could have done more. You could always argue, well, you should never have gotten to this position in the first place. Yes, that's fine with hindsight. However, I think from the point of view of, are they doing the right things? I think the answer is yes. Would I trust them going forward? I think the answer is, well, yes. So there is an argument amongst some sectors of cyber and infosec that well, off the back of this, now is the time to change vendor. The fact that CrowdStrike has been hit in this particular way, and then has actually, rather than try to cover it up, sweep it under the carpet, blah, 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 has actually done something about it and continues to be transparent about what's going on and how they'll avoid this in the future. I would say consider them perhaps to be an organisation to move to rather than move away from, in this sense. There is no guarantee that any other endpoint protection suite CrowdStrike stuff is very comprehensive. If you drink the Kool-Aid, you get very good security at very high prices, but it is very comprehensive and it works very well. But if you're just looking at the endpoint protection side of things, what makes you think that other organizations are any better at stand-up testing their what we would have called their virus signature updates years ago, but like those daily updates that you really want pushed out regularly, especially these days where the time between vulnerability discovery and exploit is very, very short. A few hours up to a few days. It's no longer weeks, let alone months. Okay, well, that kind of touches on how many vulnerabilities actually turn into, actually get exploited. As I was saying, is a couple of hundred at any particular time, probably maximum around 100 that are commonly seen. However, you want to be, that's a moving set, and you want to keep up with it. So you want people pushing out these updates really quickly. CrowdStrike's internal systems weren't robust enough. Their testing wasn't robust enough. They understand that. They will be doing stuff about it. So are you more likely or less likely to have a similar issue going forward with CrowdStrike compared to any of the competitors? Well, I would argue that they will certainly be no worse than any of the competitors, and they will potentially be better. And now, I'm not advocating for CrowdStrike. We've got no ties with them whatsoever. I know a few people that are there, but I know a few people that work in all sorts of organisations. But we've got no ties and no skin in the game whatsoever. Just thinking about this from a purely logical perspective, who is likely to be doing the right stuff right now? Well, I would tell you, I would be willing to bet that inside CrowdStrike there is a huge focus on making sure that this sort of stuff never, ever happens again. And if it does, of course, then I think that would write them off completely. I think they'll be well aware of that. So should you move? Dunno. It's up to you. Make sure you understand. Now, the other side of that is something that we see very regularly, especially in larger, medium-sized organisations or smaller enterprise organisations, is a constant state of conflict between the customer and the various service providers or vendors that they use. It's a topic of worth discussion all on its own. And if anybody's interested in my thoughts or Eliza's or Rich's or Rosie's or whoever, push a question over to us, and we'll raise it as one of the Agony Uncle things. If you want us to, we can. However, there are some concepts in this space that I think are worth considering. And the starting point is actually the buyer of services and the seller of services are on the same side. So the buyer of services has a particular need. The seller has, one hopes, a solution that addresses those needs. So why does this so regularly break down? Well, I think part of the problem for this is that I'm going to start on the buyer side, but on the buyer side, it's quite common that an organisation doesn't fully understand what they need, but they have got a fairly good idea about what they want. That comes mainly from a lack of thorough risk assessment and alignment of cyber and info risk with business risk. And the other side of it then is that the vendors in general, over the last 20, 30 years, have regularly missold and underdelivered and generally behaved badly in the vendor space, to the point where most purchasers, in the back of their mind, are concerned that what they're buying won't do what they expect. So every time something doesn't quite go right, it reinforces that's because, well, they were just trying to fleece us for the money. They can't really do the job. Let's get another vendor. Well, you end up with this rotating door of vendors, none of which actually ever satisfy the customer's needs. Now, from a service delivery perspective and from a security perspective, my opinion is, and it has been on both sides, both vendor and customer side of the fence, find vendors that will listen to you and will look to help you understand where your risks and therefore your needs really are, and will address those things. When you're in the purchasing cycle, then look rapidly to come to that agreement around either you've got a need, they've got a solution, it aligns, therefore move forward and stop faffing about, or you've got a need, they've got a solution, but it doesn't address your need well enough, therefore call it a day quickly and stop faffing about. If you find yourself contracted with somebody fixing things that you perceive to be problematic or challenging within the service, is many times more efficient than looking to throw away that service and bring in another service. So fixing what you've got almost always results in more, better satisfaction and overall more security than simply saying, oh, well, we made a mistake, or mostly my predecessor made a mistake. These guys are awful. Let's get in my favourite next people who will be equally awful, but you won't admit it because they're yours, So this whole space needs thinking about. Yeah, as I say, discussion for later on. But as for the CrowdStrike, well, one concept which I think is a very good one to consider as part of your tool set for how do I manage all this stuff going on, is the concept of what can I do to help? Now, this is something that I've been banging on about for years. Can't even remember where it originally came from. However, if you find yourself in a crisis, even if the crisis isn't of your making, it's it's been generated in some other part of the organisation, but you're associated with it. If you ask the question, what can I do to help? Okay, how can we get the service back working again? Right? Do you need any of my people? Can I use some of your people? It will get all this stuff stood up much faster, that kind of thing. If you take this what can I do to help approach, it takes the heat out of the blame game. And I've worked in enough organisations. The worst one, I think, by far, was a large financial organisation that I worked in years ago, where everybody was busily, whenever there was an issue, everybody was busily saying, right, I'm going to start out by proving it wasn't me. Okay, so I'm going to get myself out of the firing line with this stuff. And that came from very high up in the organisation, where they had a culture of blame, shame, kick and then sack people that got things wrong. Well, I do this the other way around, and I have done for a very long time. So the starting point is, how do we get it all fixed? Once you've got it all fixed, and once you've got your team working together to deliver this stuff, you can then go back in a kind of dispassionate way and look at, well, how could we have avoided this in the future? You get much more honesty around what went wrong. That way you get to be able to address the actual root causes better through that way. So think about that as part of that. I think CrowdStrike are not doing a bad job. Right, I was going to finish up with a quick article from Dark Reading about deep fakes of the royal family and the Prime Minister advertising a crypto scam. Other than, yeah, like we could talk about that one. I think we've kind of run out of time. I kind of run out of interest in that sense. Do be aware, it's going around out there. Just be aware of the fact that it's kind of unlikely that members of the royal family or the Prime Minister will be personally endorsing particular crypto money-making schemes. Deep fakes look quite good these days, but just apply a bit of logic. Anyway, that's enough from me for today. Hope you have a good Thursday, and I'll speak to you all